Welcome to another episode of Full Build Friday, where I try to build a character from a comic, game, or similar source using the baseline rules of Pathfinder Second Edition and the Path Builder app. On paper, I like the concept of those character collecting games that have a huge roster of unique characters, with varying designs and abilities. It was a contributing factor in my fascination with Magic the Gathering, and probably League of Legends itself. Unfortunately, as I staunchly refuse to pay money for a character from these sorts of games, most of them just aren't for me. Nevertheless, I found a new one in the form of AFK Journey that's been interesting me lately, and from it I have built Cecia, the Requiem of Thorns. Now, I've said it before, but I like building characters from video games like this because they have set abilities for me to work off of. So let's take a look at those and talk about some build goals. Cecia is a Graveborn Marksman, a ranged damage dealer aligned with a faction of the Undead. Perched upon a throne of thorns and always accompanied by her harp, she maintains an arrogant and superior attitude. The lore suggests that she may not actually have been a noble. Her ultimate is the Queen Summons, which calls forth Mr. Carlyle, who inherits his mistress's stats and deals damage in an arc whenever he strikes. When first summoned, and whenever this ability is reactivated, he unleashes Spiky Wrath, which traps nearby enemies in thorny vines that deal damage over time. Cecia draws might from the earth with Earth's Offering, which increases her attack speed, and Mr. Carlyle's if he's present. This will also empower his next strike, turning it into a quaking stomp that hits in an area for higher damage. Her Thorn Cluster grants Cecia and her servant the ability to punch through the defenses of her enemies, while also occasionally empowering her next attack. Then with her Hero Focus, she increases her attack speed even further. Finally, through her Trial of Thorns, Cecia can entangle a single foe herself, dealing damage and absorbing their defenses, which she of course shares with Mr. Carlyle. There's some interesting aspects to explore here, so let's get into it. Right off the bat, we've got something a little weird going on. Baseline, I want to use the Goran Ancestry to represent Cecia's association with thorns and plants, but sadly it doesn't come with a ranged attack. To befit her ability as a marksman, we're actually going to use the custom mixed heritage introduced in the player core, and take up the Leshy mixed heritage. I'm not sure if I'm a fan of actually doing this, it does feel a little gimmicky, but it is by the rules, and I need it for this build, because through Leshy, she can gain the Seed Pod Ancestry feat. This gives her an admittedly low damage, but ranged unarmed attack that can entangle enemies to represent her basic attacks within AFK Journey. Typically, the background kind of fades into exactly that, but this time around I very deliberately took the Revenant background. While this doesn't make Cecia an undead, it does make her somebody who has died and then come back, which is specifically representative of her Graveborn allegiance. This will make her trained in religion as well as Boneyard lore, but then just gives her negative healing, which I'm not entirely certain is a net benefit, so this might be a weaker background than usual. Cecia's central signature power is the Queen Summons, despite her being classified as a marksman. With that in mind, I have built her as a summoner, with a guardian plant Eidolon, to call forth her servile Sylvan, Mr. Carlyle. Now media is oversaturated with kids with monsters that can be built as summoners, so I'm happy whenever I get the chance to build a summoner that isn't just a child with a pet. Mr. Carlyle will use a primary attack that has the Forceful and Sweep trait to represent the arc that his attack's hidden, and then through the Advanced Weaponry Evolution feat, he will add the Grapple trait to his attacks as well, which is based on his Spiky Wrath. However, that is far from the only way that we will be emulating it, and is honestly the most minor ways in which we will do so. For spells, Timber and Tanglevine are probably the best cantrip options for Cecia, and the most appropriate, and she otherwise wants supportive options in these slots to bolster Mr. Carlyle. She only knows 2 first-rank spells, and from there, Flourishing Flora is the only standout option for me, with its damage and potential auxiliary effects putting it ahead of others, though it isn't particularly reflective of any of her abilities. As for her skills, she will be trained in Athletics, Intimidation, Nature, Performance, Society, and Survival. Now, she does want to be throwing some spells out there, so we definitely want to keep Charisma in tip-top shape. But then, both Dexterity and Constitution need to be right behind that as much as they can be. The former is going to let her actually make strikes with her Seed Pods, and Con will be important for an archetype that I have planned, which actually comes in at 2nd level with her Kineticist Dedication, through which she selects the Wood element, further exploring her mastery over the Brambles and Thorns. This is the reason behind the use of her Constitution, and gives her an Elemental Blast that she admittedly won't be making much use of. There are other aspects of the Kinesis though that she likes, and will be useful for this build. She looks to additional lore for her skill feat, selecting music lore to represent both her title and her always accompanying harp, even if she doesn't seem to make much use of it. Her general feat at 3rd level will actually be spent on an ancestry feat by using Ancestral Paragon to take Hidden Thorn. I don't foresee her getting into melee combat all that much, but it does feel appropriate for her and it has the Finesse trait, which means it'll be hitting at the same accuracy as her ranged attacks if she is forced into melee. A skill increase to Athletics increases that skill to Expert, but not really for her. She's instead increasing the skill for Mr. Carlyle's sake. This level, Cecia gains her 2nd rank spells, and of note from them is Entangling Flora, which can potentially represent at least the entanglement of the Spiky Wrath created by Mr. Carlyle. With her archetype now in hand, Cecia takes through the gate at 4th level to gain Timber Sentinel. Again, this is another one of those things that doesn't really resemble any of her abilities, but it's going to be our path to other Kinesis powers, and its defensive properties are handy for keeping both Cecia and her servants safe and sound. And her teammates as well, I suppose. Given her use of the harp, I went for the Virtuosic Performer as her skill feat, which will net her a bonus on checks made using her favorite instrument. Another 2nd rank spell in her repertoire lets her take Fungal Infestation, which initially doesn't look like much. But creatures that fail against it gain a weakness to slashing, and with how defense works in AFK Journey, applying a weakness could represent the defense penetration of Cecia's Thorned Clusters. An ancestry feat at 5th rank will give Cecia Murder's Thorns, which gives her thorn attack a bit more punch if by some miracle she lands a crit with it. A boost to intelligence makes her trained in acrobatics, while her actual increase for the level makes her an expert in performance. She also gains access to 3rd rank spells. And while Wall of Thorns is highly appropriate, haste feels more necessary for her to represent the attack speed boost of her hero focus, as well as Earth's Offering. Ostentatious Arrival as her 6th level class feat may serve to represent the Spiky Wrath created by Mr. Carlyle when summoned, and it is admittedly pretty good for that. However, the issue is that she doesn't really get any use out of it other than this initial summoning. So if you want a feat that she will more regularly use, I'd look at one of the tandem feats. Tandem Movement or Tandem Strike, to further try to capture the speed of her abilities simply by making her more action efficient. Then, to play into the regality that she assumes, she uses Courtly Graces as her skill feat. She honestly isn't investing too much into society, so it's iffy how useful this will be, but it is at least handy for flavor. She takes Toughness as her 7th level general feat with the intent of making Mr. Carlyle just a bit tankier, and then becomes a master in Athletics. 4th rank spells have 2 big gets for her. Murderous Vine, with its ability to entrap a single target, is a fantastic fit for her Trial of Thorns. But the defense stealing aspect of it is a little bit harder. Rather than actually stealing the defensive stats, such as AC or saving throws, she's going to use the likes of life-draining roots to hurt her enemies while defensively bolstering herself and Mr. Carlyle through temporary hit points. Unfortunately, this is probably the best way we're going to be able to achieve this ability, though there will be other ways to bolster defenses, just not really at the expense of the enemy. For her 8th level class feat, Cecia uses Advanced Element Control for Ravel of Thorns, with the intent of playing into her thorny theming. A nice aspect of this is that it makes approaching Cecia a bit more dangerous, discouraging enemies from attacking, and it also lacks any attack rolls or saves associated with it. It's just free damage and effects. As for her skill feat, she uses Impressive Performance as this build will continue to invest in her performance skill, and this expands its usefulness. Thorn's Seed Pod at 9th level adds persistent piercing damage to creatures critically struck by her Seed Pod, akin to the damage dealt over time by her Thorny Vines. Now, as promised with the last level, she becomes a master in performance. But when it comes to spells, the only thing really of note is that she can pick up a heightened Fungal Hyphae. The main benefit of this ability is to make strikes with plants in her area, which will have a higher bonus to hit and more damage than her attack rolls with her Seed Pods. Furthermore, the fact that these are defined as strikes means that they may be able to work in conjunction with feats such as Tandem Strike, though that might depend on how you read the last line of the heightened effect. I mentioned it earlier, but Cecia finally picks up Tandem Movement at 10th level to make her action economy more efficient, with the intent of capturing her effects that enhance her attack speed. If you already took it instead of Ostentatious Arrival, I would take Tandem Strike here instead. Between the scaling of summoner spells and Kineticist impulses, we definitely need to have some debuffs on enemies Cecia targets, which leads to Intimidating Glare as her skill feat for this level. Aside from offering this effect, it also feels highly appropriate, given the way that she tends to look down on people. With Cecia's Graveborn state, fast recovery at 11th level makes her more resistant to poison and disease, classic resistances of the undead. She then starts investing in intimidation to become an expert in it. With the new rank of spells that she gets here, there's only one that really stands out. Rose's Thorns is a 6th rank spell that is kind of just an enhanced version of a Tangling Flora, with it dealing damage and also leaving behind an area of hazardous terrain that she is able to expand. She uses Expert Kinetic Control for her 12th level class feat to increase the effectiveness of her impulses. It honestly isn't really relevant yet, but it will become important for some upcoming options. Then with her recent investment in Intimidation, Cecia takes Terrifying Resistance as her skill feat, which will grant her a bonus on saves against creatures she's demoralized, akin to how her Trial of Thorns will steal the defenses of her enemies. This Vain Visitor from Beyond the Veil adds Violent Vines to her build at 13th level, which is an awesome ancestry feat that gives her Murderous Vine on an hourly basis. I think it may be because the spell doesn't scale, but this is excellent for her. We've already discussed how this spell works well for her, and aside from possibly adding many more castings per day for her, as an innate spell it will scale off of her charisma, meaning it'll match her summoner spells in proficiency. She'll then become a master in Intimidation, but there aren't any really new spells for her. I'd just look at heightening the spells I've already suggested thus far. Reinforced Eidolon at 14th level can supply Cecia with a way to increase Mr. Carlisle's defenses in a way that more directly resembles her Trial of Thorns. To actually replicate the effects, you could do an act together for a Murderous Vine or Rose's Thorns while Mr. Carlisle strikes, then cast this real quick as a single action. If Cecia is quickened when she does it, she can also have Mr. Carlisle still make another strike. Then, with her dual investment in Performance Intimidation, she takes Triumphant Boast as her skill feat. I've never noticed this one before, and it seems like a lot of fun to try to work in, and to kind of show off to people if you haven't noticed it either. At 15th level, our Imperious Impaler integrates Incredible Initiative into her build, so that she can better start controlling the battlefield and disrupting the enemy before they get to act. She then becomes a legend in athletics with her skill increase. Another advanced element control achieves Sanguivolent Roots at 16th level, which are actually the main reason I delved into Kineticist in the first place. This has pretty much the exact same reasoning as her Life Training Roots, but covers a more convenient area, at least in my opinion, and I think has a higher healing potential, especially with the ability to sustain it. While this is a vitality healing effect, Cecia can actually use it to heal herself by having Mr. Carlisle be in the area. With her skill feat, she takes Fascinating Performance just to make use of the performance that we've been investing in this entire time. Cecia takes Gorn's Wrath as her 17th level Ancestry feat, giving her Nature's Reprisal as an innate spell. Much like her other innate spell, this is on a once per hour countdown, which is admittedly amazing to just create a field of control and potentially hazardous terrain that specifically affects enemies. Naturally, her skill increase goes to Performance to make her legend in it, and then there's one final spell of note. One with the Land. This allows her to make strikes similar to Fungal Hyphae, but doesn't have that worrying phrasing and hits for a considerably wilder wallop. We haven't really talked about the Queen's Summon since we first gained Mr. Carlisle, but recasting it while the Spiny Servant is swinging on the scene restores his health. Lifelink Surge at 18th level represents that, by applying fast healing to Mr. Carlisle, which does also happen to heal Cecia as well, so it's a win-win all around. She will use Legendary Performer as her skill feat for this level, since she picked up that legendary proficiency in the skill with her last increase. I wasn't quite able to capture the Thorny Thorn that a superior Spiny Spellslinger rides around on, but she will take Ride as her general feat at 19th level, at least to serve as a reference to it. Then, with her final skill increase, she becomes a legend in Intimidation. Since Cecia doesn't really do any summoning aside from Mr. Carlisle, and doesn't want to become a duplicate of him, she'll use Eternal Bond as her capstone feat. This will allow her to keep Mr. Carlisle always buffed up, whether with Boost Eidolon to resemble his Quaking Stomp, or his Reinforced Eidolon for his defenses like she does with Trial of Thorns. And then of course for her skill feat, she uses Scare to Death, because incapacitation or not, I will always want to take the chance to kill a creature as a single action with an Intimidation check. Now with that, the main build is covered, so we can start looking at options for play in a free archetype game. Obviously there's the Kineticist, but a solid, silly, yet supporter selection is a Cavalier Dedication, solely to gain a Leg Chair or Root Ball Chair, all to resemble the throne that she rides around on, and even does her walking for her on the victory screen. She needs minimal investment in this, since it doesn't do anything except serve as her transport, but making it mature means that it can stride while she's riding it, so that she doesn't have to spend an action to do so, which would be a huge boon for her action economy on top of all the action compression that she already has. Somewhat ironically, our AFK character likely requires a considerable amount of attention and involvement to play her to her full potential. So let's review what all we've built. Cecia, Requiem of Thorns, is a half-fleshy Goron summoner, with a Guardian Plant Eidolon and the Revenant background, based upon her membership in the Graveborn faction. She uses Seed Pods and a few ranged spell options as a marksman, and expands upon them with Thorn Seed Pods. Her Throne of Thorns is referenced through Ride, but never actually obtained. A focus on performance and its feats references both her title and the harp that she is always accompanied by. As a summoner, she gains an Eidolon, which can summon a Guardian Plant to represent Mr. Carlisle. The 17th level Field of Roots action that the Eidolon gains is a great way to represent Mr. Carlisle's spiky wrath, but other options to achieve this are Entangling Flora or Rose's Thorns. Recasting Queen Summons also restores Mr. Carlisle's HP, which can come from Cecia's Lifelink Surge. Finally, Mr. Carlisle's attacks hit in an arc, which is demonstrated through the sweep trait on his primary attack. The increased attack speed from Earth's Offering and Hero Focus is actually somewhat captured by the act together of the summoner, but can be further explored through other tandem actions, such as Tandem Movement, or Tandem Strike if you can fit that in there, as well as simply using the Haste spell. The empowered attack this creates for Mr. Carlisle can be referenced to the Boost Eidolon Focus cantrip, which Cecia eventually always has available to her through Eternal Boost. Cecia and her servant can also punch through the defenses of their enemies per Thorn Cluster, by making them more susceptible to damage with Fungal Infestation. She can also likely represent her more periodically powerful attacks from this ability with spells such as Timber, or the strikes that can be made as part of a heightened Fungal Hyphae, or one with the land. Her Trial of Thorns is probably the hardest ability to replicate. While she can entrap enemies with Tanglefoot or Murderous Vine, which she can get on an hourly casting through her Violent Vine feat, the defense ceiling is probably best represented through life-leeching effects. To that end, she has life-draining roots or the sanguivolent roots that she poached from the Kineticist archetype, to lend some extra health to herself and by extension, her minion. Alternatively, she could simply increase Mr. Carlisle's defensive capabilities through Reinforced Eidolon, which is another constant option that she can keep up through her Eternal Boost. Cecia is a superb sample of a supreme summoner who saps succor from squeamish supplicants with sinister sorcery, while her sycophantic Sylvan Servant solidly supports her. There's a couple more characters from this game and its parent that I want to build, but before I do, let me know what you think of this build and as well as what other builds you'd like to see. You can find level by level item suggestions for this build and other builds over on the Monster Monday blog, which is linked below, along with the Monster Monday Twitter and Discord. Thanks for watching and have a fantastic Friday.
Listen intently to the pain and screams played by my own hands as my parting gift to the world. Here's my final Requiem.